The headlights behind me flickered once, twice, then died completely. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, willing my car to keep moving, but it was no use. The engine sputtered its last, and the vehicle rolled to a stop on the narrow shoulder of the mountain road. "No, no, no," I muttered, turning the key frantically. The engine clicked weakly but refused to turn over. I slumped back in my seat, heart pounding. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not now. I fumbled for my phone, squinting at the bright screen in the darkness. No signal. Of course. The realization of my situation began to sink in. I was alone on a remote mountain road, miles from the nearest town, with no gas and no way to call for help. And it was getting colder by the minute. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. "Thanks, Sarah. What are your options?" I could stay with the car and wait for someone to drive by, but I hadn't seen another vehicle in over an hour. Who knew how long it might be before someone came along this desolate stretch? I could try walking, but in which direction? I had no idea how far it was to the next town in either direction, and walking alone on a dark mountain road didn't seem like the safest option. As I debated my next move, a flicker of movement caught my eye in the rearview mirror. I squinted, trying to make out what it was in the inky blackness beyond my car. There was again 2 pinpricks of light in the distance, growing larger. Headlights. Relief flooded through me. Someone was coming. I wouldn't be stranded here all night after all. I watched as the lights grew closer, illuminating more of the winding road behind me. But something felt off. The vehicle was moving unusually slowly, creeping along the mountain pass. My relief began to morph into unease. Why were they driving so slowly? Had they spotted my car and were being cautious? Or was it something else? I shrank down in my seat, suddenly unsure if I wanted to be seen. The headlights drew closer, casting long shadows across the road. I could make out the outline of a large truck now, still crawling along at a snail's pace. My hand inched towards a door lock. I knew I was being paranoid, but something about the situation felt wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as the truck finally pulled to a stop about 20 feet behind my car. For a long moment, nothing happened. The truck's engine idled loudly in the silence. I held my breath, waiting. Then I heard it. The creak of a door opening, followed by the crunch of boots on gravel. My heart hammered in my chest as I strained to see in my mirrors. A tall figure had emerged from the truck and was slowly making their way towards my car. I fumbled for my phone again, cursing under my breath. Still no signal. I was on my own. The footsteps drew closer, slow and deliberate. I could see the figure's shadow now, stretching long and distorted in the truck's headlights. Panic clawed at my throat. Should I get out and ask for help? Stay locked in the car? Try to drive away, even though I had no gas? Before I could decide, there was a sharp rap on my window. I jumped, letting out a small yelp, turning slowly. I found myself face to face with a man peering in at me. He was older, probably in his 60s, with a weathered face and a thick gray beard. He held up his hands in a placating gesture and mouthed, "It's okay." My racing heart slowed a fraction. He didn't look particularly threatening. After a moment's hesitation, I cracked the window a couple of inches. "You all right, miss?" the man asked, his voice gravelly but kind. "Saw your car sitting here and wanted to make sure everything was okay." I swallowed hard, finding my voice. I ran out of gas. I managed. "My phone has no signal out here. I'm not sure what to do." The man nodded sympathetically. "Yeah, reception spotty up here in the mountains. Lucky I came along. Don't get much traffic on this road, especially this time of night." He glanced back at his truck, then at me again. "Listen, I've got a gas can in the back. Enough to at least get you to the next town. Why don't you pop your tank and I'll fill you up?" Relief washed over me. "Really? That would be amazing. Thank you so much." The man smiled and headed back to his truck. I took a deep breath, chastising myself for my earlier paranoia. He was just a good Samaritan, nothing more. I pressed a button to open my gas tank and stepped out of the car, stretching my stiff muscles. The night air was crisp and clean, filled with the sounds of chirping crickets and rustling leaves. Beautiful night. The man commented as he returned with a red gas can. Don't get skies like this in the city. I looked up, gasping softly. Without the glare of my headlights, I could see that the sky was blanketed with stars, more than I'd ever seen before. The Milky Way stretched across the darkness like spilled sugar. It's incredible, I murmured. The man chuckled as he began filling my tank. One of the perks of living up here. Name's Frank, by the way. Sarah, I replied. Thanks again for stopping, Frank. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along. Frank waved off my thanks. Happy to help. We look out for each other up here. As he finished filling the tank, I dug through my purse. Please, let me give you some money for the gas. Frank shook his head firmly. Not necessary. Just pay it forward someday. I smiled gratefully. I will, I promise. Frank screwed the gas cap back on and turned to me. Now, you should have enough to make it to Miller's Creek. It's about 15 miles up ahead. Can't miss it. They've got a 24-hour gas station. They're where you can fill up proper. I nodded, committing the directions to memory. Miller's Creek, 15 miles. Got it. You'll be all right from here? Frank asked, concern evident in his voice. Yes, thanks to you. I assured him. I really can't thank you enough. Frank smiled warmly. Just be careful out here, all right? Mountains can be dangerous at night. All sorts of critters about. A chill ran down my spine at his words, but I brushed it off. I will. Thanks again, Frank. I got back in my car as Frank returned the gas can to his truck. With a deep breath, I turned the key. The engine roared to life, and I nearly cried with relief. Frank gave me a final wave as he climbed into his truck. I waved back, then carefully pulled back onto the road. In my rearview mirror, I saw Frank's truck turn around and head back the way he'd come. As I navigated the winding mountain road, my earlier fear and panic faded, replaced by a profound sense of gratitude. Frank's kindness had quite literally saved me from a potentially dangerous situation. I made a mental note to find a way to pay his generosity forward as soon as I could. The miles ticked by slowly as I kept my eyes peeled for any sign of Miller's Creek. The road twisted and turned through the darkness, lit only by my headlights and the canopy of stars above. Just as Frank had said, I spotted lights in the distance after about 20 minutes of driving. A green sign confirmed I was approaching Miller's Creek, population 506. I pulled into the 24-hour gas station on the edge of town, beyond relieved to see the brightly lit pumps and convenience store. As I filled my tank, I couldn't help but reflect on how differently this night could have gone. What if Frank hadn't come along? How long would I have been stranded on that dark road? What if someone with less noble intentions had found me there, alone and vulnerable? I shivered, pushing the thoughts from my mind. There was no point in dwelling on what-ifs. I was safe now, thanks to the kindness of a stranger. After filling up, I went inside the store to pay and grab a coffee for the road. The sleepy-eyed clerk barely looked up from his phone as he rang me up. Busy night? I asked, attempting small talk. He shrugged. Not really. You're the first customer I've seen in hours. I nodded, unsurprised. It was the middle of the night in a tiny mountain town, after all. As I turned to leave, a rack of local newspapers caught my eye. The headline made me freeze in my tracks. Search continues for missing hikers. Below was a photo of a smiling couple and a dire warning. Residents advised to be cautious on mountain roads. Do not pick up hitchhikers. My blood ran cold as I scanned the article. 3 hikers had gone missing in the area over the past month. Their cars had been found abandoned on remote mountain roads, but there was no trace of the hikers themselves. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone. There was signal here in town, and I quickly pulled up a search engine. I typed in Frank Miller's Creek missing hikers. The The results made my stomach lurch. There was no Frank matching his description in Miller's Creek or any of the surrounding towns. But there were more stories of missing hikers and motorists in the area, going back years. I stumbled out of the store in a daze, my mind reeling. Had I imagined the whole thing? No, that was impossible. My gas tank was full. Frank had been real. But who was he really? And why had he been out on that lonely road in the middle of the night? I got back in my car with shaking hands. As I pulled out of the gas station, a flicker of movement caught my eye. There, at the edge of the woods across the street, stood a familiar figure. My heart stopped as I recognized Frank's beard and weathered face. He raised one hand in a slight wave, then turned and disappeared into the trees. I slammed on the gas, tires squealing as I fled Miller's Creek as fast as I could. My mind raced with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. Who or what had I encountered on that mountain road? And how many others had he helped before me? I drove through the night, jumping at every shadow. It would be a long time before I took another road trip through the mountains, and I would never again let my gas tank get below half full. But most of all, I would always remember that sometimes the real monsters aren't the ones hiding in the dark. Sometimes they're the ones who step into the light to offer you help when you need it most. The rain pounded against my windshield like 1,000 tiny fists, each drop a reminder of how screwed I was. My piece of junk car sputtered and died, leaving me stranded on a pitch-black country road in the middle of nowhere. As I fumbled for my phone, a flash of lightning illuminated a figure standing motionless in the nearby field. My blood ran cold. I was no longer alone. I squinted through the rain-streaked window, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Another flash lit up the sky, and there it was again, a dark silhouette, unnaturally still against the wind-whipped crops. My heart pounded in my chest as I weighed my options. Stay in the car and hope help comes, or venture out into the storm to find assistance, knowing that thing was out there? I'm Jack. By the way, just your average college student who should have listened to his mom about keeping the gas tank full. Now here I was, paying the price for my carelessness in the creepiest way possible. I tried the ignition one more time, praying for a miracle. The engine coughed weakly, then fell silent. Great. I was officially out of gas and out of luck. My phone was next, but of course, there was no signal. Why would there be? That would have been way too convenient. Another flash of lightning. Another glimpse of the figure. It hadn't moved an inch. Was it even real? Maybe it was just a scarecrow or something. Yeah, that had to be it. What farmer wouldn't put a scarecrow out in the middle of a storm? I laughed nervously at my own joke, the sound swallowed up by a clap of thunder. This was bad. Really bad. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Think, Jack. What are your options? I could hunker down and wait out the storm, but who knew how long that could take? And I was pretty sure I'd seen a last gas station for 50 miles sign a while back. The chances of someone else driving by any time soon were slim to none, which left option 2. Get out and start walking. In the rain, in the dark, with creepy McScarecrow watching my every move. Fantastic, I muttered, reaching for the umbrella I knew was somewhere in the back seat. My hand closed around it just as another flash of lightning lit up the sky. The figure was gone. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. Where did it go? Had I imagined the whole thing? Somehow, its disappearance was even more unsettling than its presence, at least before I knew where it was. Now, I shook my head, trying to dispel the growing panic. This was ridiculous. I was a grown man, for crying out loud, scared of shadows and a storm. Get it together, Jack. With renewed determination, I grabbed my phone, useless as it was, and shoved it in my pocket. Then, taking a deep breath, I opened the car door and stepped out into the deluge. The rain was even worse than it had looked from inside the car. Within seconds, I was soaked to the bone, my thin jacket offering about as much protection as tissue paper. The wind howled around me, whipping the crops in the field into a frenzy. I squinted into the darkness, trying to get my bearings. The road stretched out endlessly in both directions, disappearing into inky blackness. To my right was a field where I'd seen the figure. To my left, more fields. Everywhere I looked, it was just rain, darkness, and swaying plants. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I'd never felt so alone in my life. I picked a direction at random and started walking, my shoes squelching with every step. The mud sucked at my feet, making each stride a battle. But I pressed on, determined to find help or at least some kind of shelter. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every few steps, I'd glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see that dark figure looming behind me. But there was never anything there, just rain and shadows. Time seemed to stretch and warp as I trudged along. It could have been minutes or hours. I had no way to tell. My world had narrowed to the small circle of visibility around me, everything beyond lost in the storm. Just when I was starting to think I'd be walking forever, I saw something that made my heart leap. Lights in the distance. They were faint, barely visible through the rain, but they were there. Civilization, with renewed energy. I picked up my pace, almost running towards a promise of help. As I got closer, I could make out the vague outline of buildings. It looked like a small cluster of houses or maybe a farm. I was so focused on reaching those lights that I almost didn't notice when the rain suddenly stopped. One moment I was being pelted by droplets, the next nothing. I looked up in confusion. The sky was clear. Stars twinkled overhead. No sign of the storm clouds that had been there moments ago. What the hell? I spun around, disoriented. The road I'd been walking on was gone, replaced by a dirt path. The fields had vanished too. Instead, I was surrounded by tall, dark trees that seemed to loom over me. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky. "Is anyone there?" Silence. Not even the chirp of a cricket or the hoot of an owl. Just oppressive, total quiet. I turned back towards where I'd seen the lights, but they were gone too. There was nothing but forest as far as I could see. Panic clawed at my throat. What was happening? Had I wandered off the road without realizing it? But that didn't explain the sudden change in weather or the disappearance of the fields. A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, heart pounding, and there it was, the figure from the field. Up close, I could see it wasn't a scarecrow at all. It was a person, or at least, it looked like one. It stood unnaturally still, its face hidden in shadow. But even in the darkness, I could feel its eyes on me. "Who are you?" I stammered, taking a step back. "What's going on?" The figure didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there, watching. I turned to run, but found my path blocked by another identical figure, and another. They were everywhere, surrounding me in a silent circle. My legs gave out, and I collapsed to the ground, terror overwhelming me. This couldn't be real. It had to be a dream, a nightmare. As if in response to my thoughts, the figures began to move, slowly, jerkily, like malfunctioning robots. They approached me, arms outstretched. I scrambled backward, leaves and twigs digging into my palms. "Stay back," I yelled, my voice cracking. "Please just stay away." They kept coming, their blank faces now visible in the starlight. Men, women, young, old, all with the same vacant expression and glassy eyes. Just as the first figure's hand was about to touch me, a deafening clap of thunder shook the world. I jolted awake with a gasp, my heart racing. I was in my car, rain still pounding on the roof. The glowing numbers on the dashboard told me only an hour had passed since I'd run out of gas. It had all been a dream, a terrifyingly vivid nightmare, but a dream nonetheless. Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by embarrassment. All that panic over a stupid dream. I laughed shakily, running a hand through my hair. A flash of lightning lit up the world outside my car. And there, standing in the field, was a lone figure. I blinked. Sure, I was seeing things. But another flash confirmed it. The figure was there, just as it had been in my dream. Watching, waiting. With trembling hands, I tried the ignition one more time. To my utter shock, the engine roared to life. I didn't wait to question this miracle. I slammed the car into drive and peeled out, tires spinning in the mud before finding purchase. As I sped away, I couldn't help but glance in my rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty. No figure, no field, nothing but rain and darkness. I drove through the night, jumping at every shadow and flash of lightning. It would be a long time before I took another road trip alone, and I would never, ever let my gas tank get below half full again. But most of all, I would always wonder about that figure in the field. Was it real, a product of my terrified imagination, or something else entirely? Some questions, I realized, are better left unanswered. Sometimes, the unknown is preferable to the truth, because the truth might be far more terrifying than anything we can imagine. As I finally saw lights of a town in the distance, I made a silent vow. No matter what happened, I would never return to that stretch of road. Some places, I learned that night, are best left unexplored. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. And some figures in fields are best left watching someone else. The silence was the first thing that struck me. No cars, no people. Not even the bark of a distant dog. Just an oppressive, suffocating quiet that seemed to swallow every sound our feet made on the cracked pavement. As we walked down the empty main street, lined with boarded-up storefronts and abandoned vehicles, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Then I heard it, a whisper, so faint I wasn't sure if it was real or just my imagination playing tricks on me. But when I saw the look of terror on my wife's face, I knew she'd heard it too. It had all started so innocently. A weekend getaway, a chance to escape the city and explore some of the quaint small towns that dotted the countryside. Sarah and I had been driving for hours, enjoying the scenery and each other's company, when our car started making an ominous sputtering sound. "That doesn't sound good," Sarah said, frowning as she glanced at the dashboard. I nodded, trying to keep the worry out of my voice. "Probably nothing, but let's stop in the next town, just to be safe." As if on cue, a sign appeared on the side of the road. "Welcome to Millbrook, population 1,200. Perfect timing, I thought. We'd get some gas, maybe grab a bite to eat, and be on our way. But as we pulled into Millbrook, it became clear that something was very, very wrong. The gas station on the outskirts of town was abandoned, pumps covered in a thick layer of dust. We drove down the main street, growing more uneasy with each passing moment. Every building we passed was shuttered, windows either boarded up or broken. Cars sat in the middle of the road, as if their drivers had simply gotten out and walked away. "What happened here?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the desolate scene. I shook my head, at a loss for words. It was like the entire town had been frozen in time, left to decay. That's when our car gave one final, sputtering cough and died. We coasted to a stop in front of what looked like it had once been the town hall. The imposing brick building loomed over us, its windows dark and uninviting. "Try starting it again," Sarah said, a note of panic creeping into her voice. I turned the key, but the engine didn't even attempt to turn over, dead as a doornail. "Shit," I muttered, slumping back in my seat. "I think we're out of gas." Sarah fumbled for her phone. "I'll call for help." But of course, there was no signal, because why would anything go right for us today? We sat in silence for a moment, the reality of our situation sinking in. We were stranded in a ghost town, with no gas, no phone signal, and no idea what had happened here. "We should try to find someone," I said finally, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "There's got to be somebody left in this town." Sarah nodded, though I could see the fear in her eyes. "Okay, but We stick together, all right? I reached over and squeezed her hand. Always. And so we set out, walking down the eerily quiet main street. Our footsteps echoed off the abandoned buildings, seeming unnaturally loud in the stillness. We tried every door we came across, but they were all locked tight. Through the grimy windows, we could see rooms frozen in time. Half-eaten meals on tables, TVs left on, playing nothing but static. It's like everyone just vanished, Sarah murmured, peering into what had once been a diner. I was about to respond when I heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible. I froze, straining my ears. Did you hear that? I asked Sarah. The look on her face told me she had. Where did it come from? I scanned our surroundings, but there was no movement, no sign of life anywhere. Just more empty buildings and abandoned cars. Let's keep moving, I said, taking Sarah's hand. Maybe we'll find someone who can explain what's going on. We continued down the street, our senses on high alert. The whispers came again, a little louder this time. They seemed to be coming from inside the buildings, but I couldn't make out any words. Hello, I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet. Is anyone there? We need help. No response. Just more whispers, growing in volume and intensity. Sarah's grip on my hand tightened. Mark, I don't like this. We should go back to the car. I nodded, feeling a chill run down my spine despite the warm afternoon sun. Yeah, you're right. This place is giving me the creeps. We turned to head back the way we came, walking a little faster now. The whispers followed us, seeming to come from every direction at once. Suddenly, Sarah stopped short. Mark, look, she said, pointing at one of the houses we'd passed earlier. I followed her gaze and felt my blood run cold. There, in the window, was a face, pale, gaunt, with eyes that seemed to glow in the shadows. As we watched, it slowly pulled back from the glass, disappearing into the darkness of the house. Run, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We took off, sprinting down the street towards our car. The whispers grew to a crescendo, no longer indistinct but clear and terrifying. Stay, they said. Join us. Stay forever. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. Figures were emerging from the buildings, moving with an unnatural, jerky gait. Their faces were blank, eyes glassy and unseeing. Don't look back, I yelled to Sarah. Just run. We reached our car, fumbling with the doors in our panic. I practically threw myself into the driver's seat, jamming the key into the ignition. Come on, I muttered, turning the key again and again. The engine sputtered weakly but wouldn't catch. Outside, the figures were getting closer, their whispers growing louder. Stay with us. You belong here now. Sarah was sobbing beside me, her eyes fixed on the approaching horde. Mark, please, we have to go. I tried the ignition one last time, silently praying to whatever deity might be listening. The engine roared to life. I didn't question this miracle. I slammed the car into drive and floored it, tires screeching as we peeled away from the curb. In the rear-view mirror, I could see the figures standing in the middle of the road, watching us go. Their whispers faded as we sped out of town, but I could still hear them echoing in my mind. You'll be back. They always come back. We drove in silence for a long time, both of us too shaken to speak. It wasn't until we saw signs for the next town that Sarah finally broke the silence. What was that place? She asked, her voice trembling. I shook my head, still trying to process what we'd seen. I don't know, and I don't think I want to know. We stopped at the first gas station we came to, filling up the tank and checking our phones. They worked perfectly now, as if nothing had happened. As we got back on the road heading home, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd narrowly escaped something truly horrifying. What had happened to Millbrook? Where had all the people gone? And what were those things that had chased us? Part of me wanted to report what we'd seen, to try and find answers. But a larger part knew that some questions were better left unanswered. Some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved. One thing was certain, we would never take that route again. Some towns, I realized, were better left forgotten. Some whispers were better left unheard. As we drove into the sunset, leaving Millbrook far behind, I made a silent vow. No matter what happened, no matter how lost we got, we would never stop in another small town without thoroughly researching it first. Because sometimes, the real horror isn't in what you see, but in what you don't see. Sometimes, the most terrifying thing isn't the presence of evil, but the absence of everything else. And sometimes, the whispers in the walls are better left ignored. Because once you hear them, you can never unhear them, and they might just follow you home. The bridge creaked beneath my feet as I peered over the railing, my heart pounding in my chest. The moonlight danced on the water's surface, creating an almost hypnotic pattern. That's when I saw them, multiple pairs of eyes, reflecting in the pale light, staring up at me from the murky depths. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. What the hell was down there? It had started as a typical night drive. I'm Mike, a long-haul trucker, and I was on my way back from a cross-country delivery. The roads were empty, just me and the endless ribbon of asphalt stretching out before my headlights. I was making good time, already thinking about the hot shower and soft bed waiting for me at home. Then my truck started sputtering. At first, I thought it was just fatigue playing tricks on my mind, but as the engine coughed and wheezed, I knew something was wrong. I glanced at my fuel gauge and felt my stomach drop. The needle was buried deep in the red. No, 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 I muttered, frantically searching for any signs of a gas station. But there was nothing, just miles of empty road and dense forest on either side. The truck gave one final, shuddering gasp before dying completely. I coasted to a stop, the sudden silence almost deafening after hours of engine noise. I found myself on a narrow bridge spanning a wide river. Not the ideal place to break down, but at least I was off the main road. Small mercies, I suppose. Sighing, I reached for my phone. No signal. Of course. Perfect, I grumbled, shoving the useless device back in my pocket. I'd have to wait for another vehicle to pass by or start walking to find help. I climbed out of the cab, stretching my cramped muscles. The night air was cool and damp, carrying the musty scent of the river below. I walked to the edge of the bridge, hoping to see lights from a nearby town. Nothing but darkness in every direction. That's when I heard it, a soft splash from the water below. I leaned over the railing, squinting into the gloom. Another splash, louder this time. "Hello," I called out, feeling a bit foolish. "Is someone down there?" Silence. Then, a ripple in the water caught my eye. Something was moving beneath the surface. Something big. My first thought was fish. But as I watched, I realized whatever was down there was far too large to be any fish I'd ever heard of. The moonlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the river. And that's when I saw them, the eyes, dozens of them, glowing in the darkness, all trained on me. I scrambled back from the railing, my heart racing. What the hell was I looking at? Some rational part of my brain tried to make sense of it. Alligators, maybe, but we were nowhere near gator country. And I'd never heard of alligators hunting in packs like this. Another splash, closer this time. I edged back to the railing, morbid curiosity overriding my fear. The water churned, and something broke the surface. In the moonlight, I caught a glimpse of sleek, dark skin. Not scales, like a fish or a reptile. This looked almost human, but that was impossible. Wasn't it? I shook my head, trying to clear it. I was tired, stressed from the breakdown. My mind was playing tricks on me. That's all. A low, melodic sound drifted up from the water. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, somewhere between a whale's song and a human voice. The sound sent shivers down my spine. "Hello," I called again, my voice shaking. Who's there? The singing stopped abruptly. For a moment, everything was still. Then, without warning, something launched itself out of the water. I caught a fleeting glimpse of a humanoid form, glistening in the moonlight, before it disappeared back beneath the surface with a massive splash. I staggered back, my legs trembling. This couldn't be real. I must be dreaming or hallucinating, or more splashing, more shapes emerging from the water, only to vanish just as quickly. The singing started again, louder now, coming from all around me. I pressed my hands to my ears, trying to block out the sound, but it seemed to penetrate straight into my brain, filling my head with images of deep, dark waters and ancient, forgotten things. "Stop!" I yelled, my voice cracking. "Leave me alone!" The singing crescendoed, and I felt an overwhelming urge to go to the railing, to look down into those glowing eyes. My feet moved of their own accord, drawn by some irresistible force. I gripped the railing, leaning out over the churning water. The eyes were closer now, almost at the surface. I could make out faces, beautiful, terrible faces with features both familiar and alien. One of the creatures reached up, its webbed hand breaking the surface. It beckoned to me, its eyes swirling with colors I'd never seen before. "Come," its gaze seemed to say. "Join us." For a moment, I was tempted. The water looked so inviting, so peaceful. All my troubles would disappear if I just let go and fell into those welcoming arms. A car horn blared, shattering the spell. I jerked back from the railing, gasping as if I'd been underwater. Headlights appeared at the far end of the bridge. A car was approaching. I turned back to the river, but the eyes were gone. The water was calm and still, as if nothing had ever disturbed its surface. Had I imagined it all? The car pulled up beside my truck, and a concerned-looking man rolled down his window. "Everything okay, buddy?" he asked. "Need a hand?" I nodded, still dazed. "Yeah, I ran out of gas." The man smiled sympathetically. "Happens to the best of us. I've got a can in my trunk. Let me help you out." As he filled up my tank with enough gas to get me to the next station, I kept glancing nervously at the river. But there was nothing to see, just moonlight on water. "You sure you're all right?" the man asked as he finished up. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a laugh. "Just tired, I guess. Thanks for your help." He waved off my attempts to pay him. "Don't mention it. Just be careful out here, okay? These old bridges can play tricks on your mind late at night." I nodded, wondering if he knew more than he was letting on. But before I could ask, he was back in his car and driving away. I climbed into my truck, the engine roaring to life. As I pulled away from the bridge, I couldn't resist one last look in my rearview mirror. For just a second, I thought I saw a pale face watching me from the water, its eyes glowing in the darkness. Then it was gone, leaving me to wonder if it had ever really been there at all. I drove through the night, jumping at every shadow and ripple of water. It would be a long time before I took another nighttime drive across a bridge, and I would never, ever let my gas tank get below half full again. But most of all, I would always wonder about what I'd seen in that river. Were they real, a product of an exhausted, stressed-out mind, or something else entirely? Some questions, I realized, are better left unanswered. Sometimes, the unknown is preferable to the truth, because the truth might be far more terrifying than anything we can imagine. As I finally saw the lights of a town in the distance, I made a silent vow. No matter what happened, I would never speak of what I'd seen on that bridge. Some experiences are too strange, too impossible to share, and some creatures are best left undisturbed in the depths where they dwell. But on quiet nights, when the moon is full and the water is still, I sometimes find myself drawn to rivers and lakes. And if I listen closely, I can almost hear that haunting melody drifting up from the depths, calling me home to a place I've never been, a place where glowing eyes watch from the darkness, and webbed hands reach up to welcome the unwary, a place I hope never to see again, but one that will haunt my dreams forever. The sound of metal striking earth echoed through the darkness, each rhythmic thud sending shivers down my spine. We'd thought cutting through the old cemetery would be a shortcut. Now, as we stood frozen among the crumbling headstones, listening to the unmistakable sound of digging coming from somewhere in the inky blackness, I realized our mistake. This wasn't a shortcut. It was a nightmare. It had started innocently enough. My girlfriend, Liv, and I were on our way back from a concert in the city. We were riding the high of live music and the thrill of a night out, laughing and singing along to the car radio as we cruised down the empty country roads. That's when our car started making a worrying, rattling noise. "What's that?" Liv asked, turning down the music. I frowned, listening to the ominous sound. Not sure. Probably nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Within minutes, the rattling had turned into a full-blown mechanical wheeze. The car shuddered, coughed, and then died completely. "No, no, no," I muttered, coasting to a stop on the side of the road. I turned the key, but the engine didn't even try to turn over. Liv checked her phone. "No signal," she said, her voice tinged with worry. "Where are we, anyway?" I peered out the window, trying to get my bearings. In the distance, I could make out the silhouette of a church spire against the night sky. "I think we're near that old town, Millbrook," I said. "There should be a gas station around here somewhere." We got out of the car, the cool night air raising goosebumps on my arms. That's when I noticed the cemetery. It sprawled out beside the road, a sea of weathered headstones and ornate mausoleums. And wrought iron fence surrounded it, the gate hanging slightly ajar. "Look," I said, pointing. "If we cut through there, we should come out right near the town center. It'll be way quicker than following the road." Liv bit her lip, looking uncertain. "I don't know, Jake. It feels disrespectful." I squeezed her hand. "It'll be fine. We're not going to disturb anything. It's just a shortcut." After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "Okay, but let's be quick about it." We slipped through the gate, the rusty hinges creaking ominously. Inside, the cemetery was like a different world. The noise from the road faded away, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the whisper of wind through the trees. Our footsteps crunched on the gravel path as we picked our way between the graves. The moonlight cast long shadows, making the statues and monuments loom over us like silent sentinels. "This place is creepy," Liv whispered, clinging to my arm. I tried to sound braver than I felt. "It's just an old graveyard. Nothing to be scared of." That's when we heard it, a dull thud, followed by another, the unmistakable sound of metal striking earth. We froze, straining our ears. The sound came again, a steady rhythm of digging. "What is that?" Liv hissed, her nails digging into my arm. I shook my head, my mouth suddenly dry. Probably just groundskeepers or something. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. What kind of groundskeeper would be working in a cemetery in the middle of the night? The digging continued, seeming to come from somewhere off to our right. Against my better judgment, I found myself drawn towards the sound. "Jake, no," Liv pleaded. "Let's just get out of here." But curiosity overrode my fear. I had to know what was making that noise. "Just a quick look," I promised. "Then we'll go." We crept through the graves, following the sound. As we got closer, I could make out other noises, grunts of exertion, the scrape of a shovel being emptied. Finally, we rounded a large mausoleum and saw the source of the noise. In a small clearing among the graves, illuminated by a single lantern, was a man digging. He was tall and thin, dressed in dark clothes that blended into the night. His face was hidden by the brim of a wide hat. As we watched, frozen in horror, he paused his work and turned towards us. For a moment, everything was still. Then, slowly, he raised his head. The lantern light caught his face, and I had to stifle a scream. His skin was pale and waxy, stretched tight over prominent bones. His eyes were sunken pits of darkness, and his mouth was stitched shut with thick, black thread. He stared at us, his shovel held loosely in one gloved hand. Then, impossibly, he spoke. His lips didn't move, but his voice filled my head, cold and ancient. "You shouldn't be here," it said. "This is not a place for the living." Liv whimpered beside me, her whole body trembling. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but stand there. But I was rooted to the spot, unable to look away from those terrible, empty eyes. "W, who are you?" I managed to croak out. The figure tilted his head, as if considering the question. "I am the caretaker," the voice in my head replied. "I tend to those who sleep beneath the earth." He gestured with his shovel towards the open grave at his feet. For the first time, I noticed the coffin lying beside it, its lid slightly ajar. "The dead grow restless," the caretaker continued. "They long to walk among the living once more. It is my duty to ensure they remain where they belong." A skeletal hand emerged from the coffin, clawing at the air. The caretaker calmly pushed it back inside with his shovel. "You must leave this place," he said, turning back to us. "The barrier between worlds is thin here. It is not safe for those with warm blood in their veins." As if to emphasize his point, more hands began to emerge from the surrounding graves. Bony fingers pushed through the earth, reaching for the night sky. That broke the spell holding us in place. Liv screamed, and we turned and ran. We sprinted through the cemetery, heedless of the direction, just desperate to get away. Behind us, I could hear the sound of earth shifting, of dry bones scraping against stone. Somehow, we found the gate. We burst through it, not stopping until we reached the car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. To my utter shock, the engine roared to life on the first try. I didn't question this miracle. I slammed the car into drive and peeled away, tires squealing on the asphalt. In the rear-view mirror, I caught a glimpse of the cemetery. The caretaker stood at the gate, watching us go. Around him, pale figures were emerging from the ground, their hollow eyes gleaming in the moonlight. We drove in terrified silence, not stopping until we reached the next town. We found a 24-hour diner and sat there until dawn, jumping at every shadow and noise. As the sun rose, casting its warm light over the world, the horrors of the night began to feel distant, almost dreamlike. Had we really seen what we thought we saw? Or had our minds played tricks on us, fueled by darkness and an overactive imagination? Part of me wanted to go back, to prove to myself that it had all been a hallucination. But a larger part knew that some things were better left unexplored. Some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved. We never spoke about that night to anyone else. Who would believe us? But sometimes on dark nights when the wind whispers through the trees, I find myself thinking about the caretaker and his endless, lonely vigil. And I wonder about the thin places in the world, where the veil between the living and the dead wears thin. I wonder about the restless souls that sleep beneath the earth, longing to walk in the sun once more. But most of all, I wonder if somewhere out there in a forgotten cemetery off a lonely country road, a tall figure in a wide-brimmed hat is still digging, still watching, still keeping the dead in their place. And I pray that I never have to find out for sure.